When the elderly black woman arrived at the wedding, no one paid her any attention, but by the end of the night, they'd be begging for her forgiveness. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the Montgomery estate, as if even the heavens had dressed up for the occasion. White roses bloomed along cobblestoned paths, and sparkling chandeliers dangled from the branches of ancient oak trees. Laughter floated through the air, soft music played from a string quartet in the garden, and servers in white gloves passed around champagne on silver trays. It was the kind of wedding people whispered about for months in high society. The kind where the pictures ended up in glossy magazines, where every guest felt lucky just to be invited. The bride, Olivia Montgomery, was a vision. Her gown flowed like a waterfall of pearls, and her makeup was flawless. The crowd admired her with awe. She was the beloved daughter of one of the most influential families in the state. Her father, Richard Montgomery, owned businesses that touched nearly every industry. Her mother, Victoria, was known more for her sharp tongue and designer shoes than her kindness. Together, they were the kind of couple that made sure their last name carried weight wherever they went. Standing beside Olivia was Michael Carter, tall, confident, kind, a man who built his own success without a family fortune behind him. Many admired him, but some whispered behind his back. He was brilliant, driven, but not one of them. Not really, not in name, not in blood. Still, the love between Olivia and Michael was genuine. That part, at least, no one could deny. And yet, beneath the glamour, something darker stirred. Because while the guests smiled and posed for pictures, while they toasted champagne and shared stories of wealth and yachts and summer homes, someone very special had just arrived, and the Montgomerys barely noticed. A sleek, black car pulled up slowly to the edge of the estate's driveway. From the passenger side, an elderly black woman stepped out with the help of a driver. Her silver hair was pulled back with elegance, her navy blue dress simple yet graceful. Her eyes, warm, wise, and kind, scanned the celebration with quiet pride. This was Evelyn Carter, Michael's grandmother, the woman who had raised him, loved him, believed in him when the world doubted him. And today, she had come to witness his greatest joy. She took a breath, smiled gently, then stepped forward. But with every step she took across the lawn, it became more and more obvious. Something wasn't right. The laughter softened as she approached. Conversations faded. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Victoria Montgomery, standing near the grand entrance, watched Evelyn from behind her wine glass. Her lips curled into a barely there smirk. "I suppose some people don't know the difference between formal and casual attire," she said to a cousin, loud enough for others nearby to hear. There were a few polite chuckles, the kind of laugh that people give when they're not sure if it's okay to laugh, but they do it anyway. Evelyn heard the comment. Her posture didn't change. Her smile didn't fade. She'd heard worse, much worse. Olivia's father didn't even speak to her, just gave her a quick nod as he walked by, as if she were a stranger. The rest of the Montgomery family, much the same. Glances, judgments, quick goodbyes. Michael saw it all, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But before he could say anything, Evelyn reached out and gently touched his arm. "It's all right, dear," she said, her voice soft and steady. "Some lessons take time." She moved to her seat, alone, near the edge of the reception, while the rest of the guests danced, mingled, and shared champagne under fairy lights. Everywhere she went that evening, she was treated like she didn't belong. When she sat at a table, guests subtly scooted their chairs away. When she tried to make polite conversation, people responded with short, cold answers. When she reached for a small appetizer from a passing tray, Victoria actually winced. Michael watched, his heart heavy with anger. But Evelyn, she remained calm, graceful, like a storm could pass around her and she wouldn't so much as blink. What the Montgomerys didn't know, what no one in that crowd had the slightest idea about, was that this quiet, elegant woman sitting on the sidelines was about to change everything. The reception was in full swing. Laughter rang through the gardens. Glasses clinked together in celebration. Photographers snapped photos of smiling guests dressed in gowns and tailored suits, posing beneath strings of golden lights. Waiters moved swiftly through the crowd, offering trays of canapes and imported wine. It was a perfect evening, elegant, lavish, exclusive. But at one table, off to the side, sat Evelyn Carter, alone. No one from the Montgomery family had joined her. In fact, they seemed to avoid her entirely. Their conversations paused when she passed. Their gazes flickered over her, then looked away. Evelyn noticed. She noticed how they fawned over the high society guests, the judge whose decisions made headlines, the CEO of a fashion empire, the tech billionaire who'd flown in from Europe just for the wedding. They surrounded these people, hung on every word, laughed at every joke. But when Evelyn spoke, silence, polite nods, eyes drifting elsewhere. She wasn't wearing designer labels. She didn't arrive with a flashy entourage, and to them, that made her invisible. Victoria Montgomery sat at a nearby table, swirling red wine in her glass. Her tone was light, her voice smooth, but her words were sharp. "Michael turned out well, considering his background," she said, as if Evelyn couldn't hear her. But Evelyn could. Loud and clear, still as she didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had lived through decades of worse. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Michael, who had been trying his best to ignore the disrespect, turned toward Olivia, his bride, his partner. He looked at her, waiting, hoping she would say something, anything. But Olivia bit her lip and looked away. It was their wedding day. She didn't want to start a fight. She didn't want a scene. Evelyn saw the tension in her grandson's face. She gently placed a hand on his arm. "Not yet," she whispered. A little farther away, Richard Montgomery, the patriarch, sat in the middle of his circle of influence. Men in expensive suits leaned in as he spoke. He shared stories, opinions, jokes, and whether they were funny or not, people laughed. At one point, he made a comment about old traditions being outdated, wrapped in charm, dressed up in language that sounded modern, progressive. But the meaning was clear. Some customs belonged to a world beneath theirs, unrefined, out of place. Michael clenched his jaw, because his family had traditions too, of resilience, of strength, of dignity. And his grandmother, she was the very symbol of it. But Richard didn't even look at her. Still, Evelyn didn't flinch. She remained composed, sipping her tea, watching, listening. She didn't need to fight for space in that room, because she knew who she was. When a guest at her table mentioned the challenges of managing wealth, Evelyn offered a soft smile. "True wealth," she said, "isn't measured in numbers. It's in how you treat people." Another guest laughed dismissively at the idea of humble beginnings. Evelyn replied gently, "You'd be surprised how many great things came from places others choose to overlook." Most of the Montgomerys didn't hear her, and even if they did, they weren't listening. But one man was. Sitting quietly across the garden was an older gentleman, Well-dressed, calm, observant. He hadn't said much all evening, but he had watched everything. He saw how Victoria looked at Evelyn with disdain. He heard Richard's remarks. He noticed the cold shoulders and dismissive glances. He was no ordinary guest. And when Evelyn lifted her gaze, she met his eyes. There was something in his look. Recognition, respect, a knowing smile. Something was about to shift, and the Montgomerys were completely unaware. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn as soft golden light filtered through the trees. The music played on. The guests kept chatting, laughing, dancing. But under all the glamour and celebration, a storm was quietly building. Then came a tap on the microphone. The event coordinator stepped up onto the small stage in the center of the garden. She smiled at the crowd and spoke clearly, her voice echoing through the venue. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "it is an honor to introduce a very special guest this evening, an individual whose contributions to business, philanthropy, and social change have left a powerful mark on this country. Please welcome our guest of honor." A wave of excitement passed through the crowd. The Montgomerys straightened in their seats. Their friends leaned in, curious. A guest of honor? At their event? To them, this could only mean one thing, another jewel in the crown of their social prestige, another reason for everyone to envy them. Then the well-dressed man who had been quietly observing the evening stood. All eyes turned toward him. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks were lowered. People leaned forward with anticipation. But instead of heading toward the stage, he turned. And he walked directly toward Evelyn Carter. Gasps echoed through the air. Guests turned to each other, whispering, "Who was she again?" He stopped in front of her table, and then he bowed his head slightly. "Madame Carter," he said with genuine reverence in his voice, "it's been far too long." The entire garden froze. Evelyn looked up and smiled warmly. Her voice was soft, familiar. "Ah, William," she said, "you haven't changed a bit." And just like that, the silence broke, because now people were putting the pieces together. William Carter, not just any guest, not just any man, a billionaire, a global figure, a man who had built empires, changed industries, and funded education for thousands, a man whose name was spoken in boardrooms around the world, and he had just bowed to her. Victoria Montgomery's hand shook, her wine glass tilted dangerously in her fingers. Richard's confident smirk slipped away, replaced by confusion, then dread. Olivia looked from Evelyn to William, her mouth slightly open, struggling to process what was happening. William turned to the crowd, raised a hand. "Many of you know me as a businessman, a philanthropist, a man of numbers and deals and headlines. But," he said, "none of that would have happened without the woman sitting here." He looked back at Evelyn. She built an empire before the world was ready to see a woman like her do it. She shattered barriers, opened doors that were slammed shut. She mentored leaders, funded dreams. She is a force of nature and a legend in her own right. The crowd was silent, captivated. Some guests looked away, remembering the cold shoulders they'd given her earlier. Others simply stared. William's voice rang clear. She didn't just make money. She made change. She built legacies. She gave when no one else would. She believed in people who had nothing, and she made them believe in themselves. Then he paused and looked directly at the Montgomerys. And tonight, many of you overlooked her, judged her, dismissed her. Now the spotlight was no longer on the chandeliers or the roses, but on the truth. and the Montgomery family had nowhere to hide. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Moments ago, the Montgomerys had basked in attention, surrounded by admiration. But now, all eyes had turned to Evelyn Carter, the woman they had treated as a stranger, the one they thought didn't belong. Guests began whispering to each other, stunned. Their expressions said it all. Madame Carter? That Madame Carter? The one from those articles? She's his mentor. Victoria Montgomery sat stiffly in her chair, her face pale. Her fingers still clutched the wine glass as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the moment. Richard stared ahead, unblinking. His jaw tightened. This couldn't be happening. This elegant, quiet woman, the one they barely acknowledged, was someone the world respected, someone the most powerful people in the room looked up to, someone far beyond their reach. Some guests tried to pretend nothing had changed. Others looked deeply embarrassed. A few, with guilt in their eyes, whispered apologies under their breath, not to Evelyn, but to themselves, for how they had acted, for what they had thought. Michael stepped forward, his voice calm, his expression steady, but there was fire behind his words. "It's funny, isn't it?" he said, looking directly at Olivia's parents. "You were so concerned with status, so obsessed with appearances. But the most important person in this room is the very one you treated like she didn't matter." Richard flinched. Victoria's forced smile trembled. Michael shook his head slowly. "All night, you acted like she didn't belong. Like she wasn't good enough for this place, but she's done more, built more, given more, meant more than anyone here even realizes." Olivia stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes filled with shame. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Michael. "I should have said something sooner. I should have stood up for her." Michael looked at her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then gently he took her hand. "It's not your burden to carry," he said quietly. "What matters is what happens next." Olivia nodded, her voice trembling. "Then I promise you, our marriage won't be built on the kind of ignorance I saw tonight. I won't let that be our legacy." Across the lawn, Evelyn looked at them both. She smiled, not with pride, not with triumph, but with hope. "That's a good start, dear," she said. "Change doesn't come from words. It comes from what you choose to do after the words are spoken." Victoria, still trying to recover the moment, leaned toward Evelyn with a shaky laugh. "Oh, Evelyn, we had no idea. If only you had told us who you were." Evelyn raised her hand slowly. "There was nothing to say," she replied, her voice calm but unwavering. "A person's worth isn't found in what they tell you. It's revealed in how you treat them." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. She had no reply. Richard, ever the businessman, extended his hand, a desperate smile on his face. "Well, Madame Carter, it truly is an honor. Perhaps we can—" But Evelyn didn't take his hand. With the same quiet grace she had shown all evening, she simply turned away. No words, no anger, no need for revenge. And in that one gesture, she delivered the most powerful message of all. The music slowly resumed in the background. Conversations began again, but they weren't the same. Something had changed. The air felt different. The Montgomery estate still glittered with chandeliers and the scent of roses still lingered, but the illusion of superiority had shattered. Guests who once ignored Evelyn now gravitated toward her. Some approached with admiration, others with quiet regret. A few simply stood nearby, unsure of how to make up for what had already been said, and what had been left unsaid. Evelyn, ever composed, remained at her table. She didn't gloat, she didn't boast. She just smiled kindly and continued her dessert. It was a silent statement, one that echoed louder than any speech, because Evelyn didn't need to prove anything. She had already done so, through a lifetime of resilience, generosity, and quiet strength. She didn't walk around demanding respect, she commanded it, just by being who she was. At the other end of the garden, Victoria and Richard Montgomery sat in silence, no longer the untouchable elites, no longer admired, but exposed, stripped of their charm, their arrogance now visible for everyone to see. Victoria stared blankly at her glass, her thoughts racing, replaying every moment of the night, every insult, every assumption, every time she had judged someone based on what they wore, or how they spoke, or where they came from. For the first time in years, she felt small. Richard, always the one in control, clenched his jaw. He had made a career out of being the most powerful man in the room, and yet tonight, the most powerful person had been someone he didn't even bother to greet. Across the garden, Evelyn was surrounded by people. Some shook her hand. Others simply listened as she spoke. But everyone leaned in now. They weren't trying to impress her. They were trying to understand her. Michael stood nearby, his shoulders relaxed now, his pride for his grandmother glowing from within. He wasn't angry anymore, just grateful that the truth had come out, that the right people finally saw her for who she truly was. And Olivia, she stayed by his side, quiet, thoughtful, changed. The shame she'd felt earlier still sat heavy on her chest, but now it wasn't just shame. It was resolve. She turned to Evelyn once more. "I meant what I said," she told her softly. "I won't let prejudice define our family. Not now. Not ever." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's how it begins," she said. "Not with grand gestures, but with small promises. Kept." As the evening drew to a close, the guests began to leave. The fairy lights twinkled above like stars, and the air had cooled with the night. But something far more important lingered. A lesson. One that no one there would ever forget. Because the Montgomerys had learned the hard way that respect isn't earned through money or power. It isn't something you demand with a name on a building or the size of a bank account. It's in how you treat people when you think no one's watching. And sometimes, the person you look down on today might be the very one who owns the room tomorrow. Evelyn didn't have to say any of that. She had lived it. And now, they all knew